Thanks, Mike. Next speaker is Leslie Curtis, who's Professor of Medicine and Director for Pragmatic Health Services Research at the Duke Clinical Research Institute. So is it Pragmatic Health Services or Pragmatic Research?
This is Pragmatic Health Systems Research. Great, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here today, and a real pleasure to be able to talk to you about the Sentinel initiative and the work that has been done over the last, 7, 8 plus years. Just to bring us all on the same page about where the Sentinel initiative began, it really began in response to the 2007 FDA Amendments Act that mandated the creation of an active surveillance system, really to leverage the data that exist around, specifically those in private health plans for active medical product surveillance. The mini Sentinel pilot was born out of that, and really the goal, the objective was to stand up an infrastructure to test this idea that one could leverage private health plan administrative claims type data for near real-time active safety surveillance. The goals that were set forth seemed very lofty. I should say, as a disclaimer, I have had the privilege of co-leading the data core for Sentinel from its inception. So I can tell you that the goal of having access to data from 25 million people by July of 2010 seemed like a fairly lofty goal when we started out. I'm pleased to say that we met that and exceeded it, and also the second one. But this pilot, which I've often described as a really ingenious way of getting this started, allowed the mini Sentinel team to stand something up and test it before really going live in a big way. Today I want to talk, since the topic is real world evidence, I want to talk about what I think are the three really not secret ingredients for the Sentinel, the mini Sentinel pilot and the Sentinel initiative that should inform the way we think about real world evidence. And those three listed here: engaged partners, real attention to data quality, and reusable tools. I want to start with a major shout out to all of the organizations and partners that have been involved in Sentinel from the beginning. The effort, the Operations Center, is led out of the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute. Rich Platt, Jeff Brown, and others at Harvard Pilgrim that have led this from its inception. Importantly, there are scientific and data partners all around the country in these national health plans, national and some regional health plans, and other partners who've been engaged along the way. And then scientific partners who bring expertise, not necessarily data to the table, but expertise. Now, what do I mean by engaged partners? We're talking about using data to inform regulatory decision making, or to at least be one source of information used for regulatory decision making. And at the end of the day, you need to have people who understand the data on which that information that's being generated, on which that's based. So having the ability to have real conversations and dialogue with those partners in these institutions really, I think, has been critical along the way. In bringing those partners together, one of the first questions is, do you centralize the data or do you distribute it? And as someone who's been working in distributed data systems for a while now, folks sometimes assume that I'm a big proponent of distributed data networks. And I'll be the first to say that if people are willing to send you their data, you take it. And it's going to be a whole lot easier, right? But that really wasn't an option for this. We were bringing together health plans, many of whom had certainly had strong competitive and business proprietary interests at stake. And we recognize that, and we're able to bring them together by agreeing that they could keep their data behind their firewall. They got to decide when and if they would respond to questions that came their way. We promised them that we'd only ask that they provide minimally necessary information. We weren't going to ask for more than what we needed, and told them that we would work to preserve patient privacy and their proprietary interests. What's a fascinating outcome here, especially with respect to that second point, often when I describe that partners have the choice of responding or not, I can think of few times that the partners opted not to respond. And it was usually when they did because they actually knew something more about their data than we did, right? So we might pose a question and they'd say, actually, we're not going to answer that because that's not on our formulary, or you won't see that in our data for these reasons. So again, reinforcing the importance of having those folks who understand their data well. The second ingredient that I really want to talk a little bit about is attention to data quality. And, you know, we've spent several hours this morning talking about electronic health record data, some of the real challenges of data quality. And that's been something that we've paid an awful lot of attention to. I promised Jesse personally that I would not spend time talking about the Pcornet Common Data Model, and the Sentinel Common Data Model, and I won't, except to say that there is one. And the reason that there is one is because when we're thinking about how we do work in a distributed data network, you need to have everyone organizing their data in the same way, because the goal from the beginning was to send executable code to all of the participating partners so that they could run that code without modification behind their firewalls. So there has to be a common data model, and the Sentinel Common Data Model has data from administrative claim sources, certainly from clinical sources, and also registry-based sources. For what it's worth, I thought that the discussion this morning around common data models, the panelists made all of the comments that I would have made. And probably the most important one being that data models often exist to serve a specific purpose or to serve a purpose. And I think that's really why this one exists and why others exist in slightly different forms. But it's important that they can all sort of get between one another. So currently, across these participating 19 health plans, there are data from about 190 million individuals representing 350 million person years of observation time. 39 million of those are currently accumulating data. That is, they're currently enrolled and continue to accumulate data. Lots of dispensings and many, many unique encounters. I think when I'm asked to talk about the real value of Sentinel as an example of real-world evidence development, I often sort of go right to the point about a well-defined population. So these represent individuals with private health plan coverage, private health care insurance. We have well-defined longitudinal person time for them. We know when they are in the plan and when they are not, which is critical for the kind of work that we're doing. And if an event was medically attended and somebody was paid for it, we can be quite certain that we observe that event. Maybe to get back to a point that Luca made earlier today, really critical to know where your data come from and to know what that source of data or that generation process, what that means in terms of what you're likely to observe and the biases that may be inherent. So again, I think this is a critical aspect. And in addition, through these Sentinel partners, we have the ability to obtain electronic or paper medical records, redacted, that allow for validation and subsequent investigation of observations. So on the basis of that data model, as I mentioned a minute or so ago, the partners transform their claims data into the PCORNet Common Data Model. And each time they refresh those data, the data mart undergoes about 1,500 data checks that make sure that those data were transformed according to the common data model, looks at integrity and relationships between tables. We look at trends over time, just to make sure that nothing strange pops up in the data. And you might wonder, like, why would you do this every time? That just seems like such a waste of time and energy. Well, it turns out that it's not. The underlying data sources are very dynamic. They change all the time. And in fact, we have some great examples where a data source that looked fine at one refresh, the next refresh, data from 2 periods prior, not even new data, something changed. It looked very different. And what had happened is that some sort of feed of data got interrupted, some stream was diverted elsewhere, and those data were no longer represented. So we learned it's very critical to check the data and pay a lot of attention to it. It also helps us to kind of help the community of partners learn about best practices in data transformation as well. So we can identify problems, differences across data partners, and use that as an opportunity to talk about how best to do some of these things. Now, the last not-so-secret ingredient that I want to talk briefly about is this notion of reusable tools. And at the very beginning, when we were presented with this challenge and thinking about what we needed to stand up, what the key components of this infrastructure would be, we recognized that we needed to have a library of tools that would allow us to answer the kinds of questions that FDA would likely have for the mini Sentinel then Operations Center. So we thought about that. What are the kinds of questions? And as we thought about it, we realized those questions probably took some fairly standard forms, different flavors, but some standard forms, right? How many people have been exposed to X? Of people exposed to X, what outcomes have we observed? Have we observed an association between X and Y? And as we thought about the structure of those questions, that really informed what the structure of those reusable tools would need to be. The tool set has evolved really considerably over the last 7+ years. From early on, a few modular programs that had some modules sort of put together to answer questions, to the CIDA tool, the cohort identification and descriptive analysis tool, that's really quite a robust and elegant tool that allows questions to be answered in a variety of ways, using a variety of methods, that all decisions around that are driven by the question at hand. So what's the question, what's the best way to answer it, and how do we use the tool in the most appropriate way to answer that question? With the data and these tools, the Sentinel, the Mini Sentinel Ops Center, and now the Sentinel Ops Center has been able to answer a lot of questions. I'm just highlight a couple of papers that have been published, because some of these have been published in the peer-reviewed literature. You may be familiar with the work done by FDA looking at dabigatran and post-market reports of bleeding. Certainly the important work done looking at intussusception risk after rotavirus vaccination, and also the association between trivalent inactivated influenza vaccine and febrile seizures. So in total, the impact of Sentinel, of the Sentinel Operations Center, of this tool for, I would say, real-world evidence and for the development of information for FDA has been really quite I think, impressive, with 4 FDA drug safety communications, a series of methods papers, peer-reviewed articles, and many, many assessments of products, conditions, and product outcome pairs. Thank you very much.